the Wisconsin fishing openers this week in Minnesota. Mr. Chair, I think we can get started.
All right, who's taking charge? You?
I think I'll kind of kick it off. It'll be a joint project. So obviously this is part of a series of conversations that we're having with the board. You recall that my priority for this board is that we begin adopting longer range master plans, facilities, personnel, capital improvement, and so on. And so we started with a staffing analysis, not a full-blown master staffing plan, but just a staffing analysis covering roughly the next 5 to 10 years for the departments that occupy the admin building, the annex, the county attorney building. We really didn't go into the highway building because that's a fairly new construction. The Alexander building we didn't touch because that had kind of gone through its own analysis. But based on that, we asked Wool to kind of take a look at our space needs, take a look at where we might anticipate some growth and might need some additional officing. But we also asked them to take into consideration the fact that we have an aging building across the street here, the annex. Jake can confirm, but I think we have 5 new natural water features, which is not a good situation for employees, records, or otherwise. It was a building we purchased. It was a dorm, it got rehabbed. It's decades old and probably well past its prime. It might not have even been a good choice for us, but so be it, it's what we've got. So what we're really trying to do is to get our hands around current state, get our hands around what our vision might be for the next 5, 10, 20 years, and begin asking the board to prioritize what our building projects could be over that period of time, and to hopefully establish a horizon of when we think we need to have either new or upgraded or replacement facilities online. And once we know the board's preferences, not decisions mind you, but just preferences, then we can let finance take a look at what are our funding options. What can we use our reserves for? How can we time the fact that we've got 2 bonds that are going off the books, one this year, another one in 30? Can we schedule our construction debt around those bonds coming off the books to maintain some level of levy neutrality going forward? That's been something that the board has stressed consistently, that we definitely want to make sure that we are very cognizant of the needs of the taxpayers as we reflect upon our own facility needs. So my goal this afternoon was to revisit some of the proposals that Wool had put out there, and really to address the question of, is there anything in that proposal that's simply not an option? Are there things that we can take off the table, or is everything still potentially subject to debate and concern? The next thing, and this is kind of that facilities analysis spreadsheet, I just kind of took a look at what some of the factors might be in deciding how we might prioritize some of our existing facility needs, and maybe we can identify 1, 2, or maybe even 3 top priorities as part of our conversation, that then Ashley could begin taking a look at some numbers to bring back to another work session. And then the last topic that I'm hoping we would have time to cover yet today is that we do have ongoing capital needs. Now, it could be in the form of repairs, it could be in the form of replacements, or it could actually be improvements that have a useful life more than maybe a calendar year or 2. For example, we have to figure out what we're going to do with the roof on the annex. And so I was hoping that the board could have a little bit of a conversation about what are some of the factors that you would consider that the staff should take into consideration as we bring things forward. So for example, if the goal is to replace the annex at some point in the near term, what types of expenditures or what factors would the board consider as we look at the types of repairs and replacements we might need to do in the interim? Are there some things, again, that are just simply not on the table, like putting a brand new roof on that building? Are there other things that we could do in the interim? We know that there's building maintenance. For example, the Four Seasons every year comes forward with their CIP for board consideration as part of the annual budget that says these are the things that we need to do as part of our building maintenance. The building is still perfectly fine. Last year it was a roof. This year it'll probably, did the HVAC units get done with the roof? So it's gonna probably be having something to do with the chillers, or maybe something to do with the ventilation or whatever. That we know that those things are regular and recurring, and we just simply build it into our CIP plan for that year, and then it's part of our budget conversation for that same year. So those kinds of issues are not really what I'm thinking about. It's really more For example, the county attorney building, we need to create some more workspaces, and there's a matter before the board that'll be on the agenda for this evening as to whether the board is willing to make some modest investments in that building, pending maybe a longer-term decision on what we want to do with that facility. Is that a 5-year replacement? Is that a 10-year replacement? What do those investments look like? So those are the 3 things. Is there anything not on the table? What are your top priorities if you can make that decision? And then thirdly, what would be the factors the board would want to consider as we talk about some of the interim repairs and replacements that might be needed? So that's kind of my goal for you. If you've got questions, let me know. But I'm going to turn it over to John, and again, just remind everybody what we had talked about in our last facilities meeting. And we can either, if you see something and the consensus of the board is that's not going to happen, then we could just make a footnote of that.
We go through the list again, I don't understand, like corrections is on the list, we just got a brand new building.
So this is your long-range facilities analysis. So the corrections building has a useful life of 20 years, 30 years. So at some point, we're gonna have to do some repairs or replacements. So it's probably your lowest priority as a board. But I think if we're gonna do a 20-year master facilities plan, we have to consider existing buildings and make sure that we're building that out into your long-range plans to know that at some point, we're gonna have to maybe make some repairs or replacements even to that building. Yes, it's not gonna happen in the next 5 or 10, but probably 20 years out, we might have to do some work. I don't know what that is on that building. That would probably be something for the experts, not me, but even the highway shop. At some point, we're gonna have to do some periodic maintenance to that building. So I wanted to make sure that we included all current facilities to make sure that as you're looking out 20 years, as you're looking out 30 years, that you don't lose sight of the fact that we also need to be maybe saving or planning for some of these other buildings beyond just those that are in the highway. So for example, I've got the landfill office and the shop. I don't think we've ever talked about the pole barn that is the shop out there. We obviously are doing major upgrades as we build out new cells, but I don't think we've ever talked about the maintenance that might be necessary in that building. Or the office building itself, the gatehouse. It's in pretty good shape, but at some point it's probably gonna need a roof, maybe some siding, I don't know. But I do wanna make sure that we've at least kept in mind as we look out 20, 30 years, that there's other buildings that we wanna make sure we have a plan for. So if you want to just, again, walk through some of the scenarios.
So I think just as a reminder from our last conversation, when we went through some of the space type stuff, certainly there are a few unknowns that we're still kind of waiting for conclusions on. The biggest one probably is in and around the human services piece of it that may impact the numbers. So just for everybody's knowledge and reminder on that, we're just using the square footage as it exists today as a benchmark for potentially what square footage might be needed in the future. I think there's some generalized consensus based on our conversations that that square footage that's up there is probably adequate for county use once that new staffing study is complete. So that may change a few things in here as you look at kind of the long-term numbers on it. But just for kind of conversational purposes, we haven't really dove too in-depth into what the management structure is, how many workstations we need, what are the final staff numbers, and we're happy to change that as we move forward with some of this stuff. So, but again, as I said, modest deficiencies, not a lot. I think most of the departments were very reasonable as far as any future growth as far as staff goes. So much of it is just existing deficiencies, whether it's building deficiencies or one of the big things is lack of meeting spaces and some of those types of things. And so if there's any questions on that, you can look at those individually as we go along. But our main focus was on each of the buildings, if you will, that you have. And if we, thinking about this site that we're on right now, we have this building, government services building, and then we have the annex and extension building, the old public works component to that, which would be by extension. So certainly a lot of talk has been talked about that. So in all of our conversations, we've really talked about this as just decommissioning or demolishing that. So some of the budgetary numbers that need to be considered in the future is if you decommission it, what happens to it. And so just for study purposes, we are including in any of the budgeting scenarios what it might cost to make it into this green space at this point in time. The county does have adequate resources around here to deal with whatever facility needs that you come up with, whether it's just looking at additions to this building to house what would be coming out of the annex itself, which would be for public health. So if you look at the program for public health, roughly about 10,000 net square feet of need, depending upon the type of facility, you know, whether it's more flexible office space versus, you know, more actual offices and stuff like that. But based on our study, roughly about 10,000 square feet. You take that 10,000 square feet, gross it up to actual building square footage, walls, mechanical spaces, all those types of things, you end up with roughly about 13,500 square feet to deal with the needs of public health. And so on either the kind of the northeast or southeast side of this building, he would do an addition, and that would be something that would be an outcome of a design study as to which one would make the most sense. And it's just a matter of how you want to connect into the existing lobby and how much internal changing in this building would you want to do to accommodate that department in here. So you could just put them in addition, they can function just as they are, but perhaps the outcome of the study is more of a combined social services and public health would be appropriate, and that might mean you want to change some things to create some lobby space and some interview space and some of that type of stuff on the first floor, which may then move some of the other departments around this building. And so when we looked at the cost study for doing additions on here, we assumed that there would be some sort of internal reorganization if you were going to do that. And as to whether or not we need to do that or not, that would be a design conversation based on what the operational model is that comes out of that study. But suffice it to say, you need roughly about 13,500 square feet of space to accommodate that. The other thing we looked at was, could we do new construction on the site for a combined public health and human services building? The only challenge with that would be the argument of, well, we have plenty of space in here for social services, so why would we push them out into another building? It just gets into, do you want them operationally in the same building? The only con to that solution is that leaves 11,500 square feet in this building that we would have to pull something into this building in order to fill that space up. You don't have enough internal departmental needs amongst all the other departments to fill up that space, right? Now, certainly there are some other things, whether that's extension or others that hasn't really landed yet, that you could do a study on as to who might fit in there. So it's mostly in here to say we've got an adjacent site here. If you wanted to do standalone, it would just be the board's preference on how we want to combine those two departments, or whether it doesn't matter, right? So that would take care of any long-term needs, not only for the health and human services components, but also for some of the departments in this building as well. So I think in looking at stuff here, we also looked at the old school district office building. I think there was some conversation at the last meeting that this doesn't seem like a good fit for the county, so this would be a good opportunity to say, yeah, we looked at it, but no, we're not going to do anything with that. And if that's consensus, we'll put an X through this one and move on.
I think that is a consensus.
Okay.
I think that's contrary to what we're trying to do, is have, develop that campus type feel, if you will. It would separate us too much, and plus the renovation costs alone in there to make it work, this doesn't make sense in my opinion.
So we'll take that one off the table, and you suggested a big red X or something similar?
Yep.
I think that's what I'm hearing from the board.
So then as we go downtown and we look at the courthouse, obviously over the years, we've talked a lot about some of the concerns for security and some of the inefficiencies in that existing courthouse. Across the street at that site is also our existing county attorney's office building, which obviously needs to have additional space in order to meet the growth needs for the county attorney's office. And also potentially where do we house child support staff? They need to be co-located with the county attorney's office. That does create some challenges. This is the site that we added the corrections building on there. So again, as Renee had mentioned, we don't see any particular needs or issues there. It's just another building that you have located in that area. So last time we talked about a couple of ideas related to this. I think my recommendation at that time was to try to have as light a touch as you can on the existing historic side of the building. Certainly there might be some restoration things you might want to consider over the years, but if we are specifically focusing on what we want to do for security and for space needs in there, and potentially having the county attorney be in that building as well, we would need roughly about 20,000 square feet in order to accomplish that. That would take the program that we came up with for the county attorney's office and leave roughly 8 to 10,000 square feet of space to be able to do a secure entry for the sheriff's department for weapon screening. It would allow us juries and jury assembly and meeting space, potentially some sort of a flexible hearing room in that area, and some sort of a secure area for inmate transfer from the jail. Undefined as to how that all fits together, but we would roughly be able to fit that 20,000 square feet on the south side of that site. If the county attorney's office was no longer in that existing building, that would allow you to pave that area as well. So beyond that, if we didn't want to look at combining those into a singular building, you could rebuild the county attorney's office on that same site. I think the only challenges would be as to just moving back and forth between buildings and, potential parking stuff, all things that, are solvable, but this would keep the county attorney in a separate building from the courthouse. So,
Is there room in the courthouse for the county attorney to go temporarily or not?
No, there's not a lot of room. I think the district court's pushing for space right now as it is, if I recall correctly.
CCA's using space up there already.
At the courthouse?
Tell you
Yes.
what, I'm absolutely opposed to admission onto the courthouse. We just spent, how much money a year ago to revamp and rebuild the parking lot over there, and you're talking about covering it up.
Okay.
And I can't take that to the taxpayers. That was a waste of money at that point.
I would encourage you to think long-term. If we're not gonna do anything to the courthouse for 10 years, that parking lot was an absolutely important investment because we needed to do something with it. So as you look at investments made, make sure that you're putting it in the context of, if we were gonna tear it up today to do something else, I would question whether or not that was a good choice. And I would make sure going forward that we ask those questions. That was why I wanna make sure any interim repairs or replacements, that we have some priorities, but definitely.
I think there's some other options that can be available for the county attorney's space, that would not involve the courthouse itself.
And I think that speaks to the, how you make projects, or, I think we'll sort that out when we get to that part of this exercise, what's most important.
Jake?
Just because we have it there doesn't mean, this is just one bubble. There's always other options as well. It could go on the west side, or just kind of keep that in mind too.
I understand.
And then the other piece to the puzzle, and obviously the sheriff is with us today, is that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing either. Which is that there could be opportunities to enhance some of the security elements without putting an addition on, at least today. The addition could be your 20-year plan, or it could be your 15-year plan, but we could prioritize, and so it's not always an all or nothing. But I think that entrance has been the source of concern for several groups for a while now, so there could be ways, but that's where I would want the board to be confident in saying that is a worthwhile investment because it buys us the safety and security we need today, pending the longer term plan, which could be an addition or could be something different. So again, as we're mapping through all of this, they're not all or nothing, but it's a function of time as well.
The big question mark on that to me is, you say the state is gonna say that we need more courtrooms, but they haven't told us that yet, so it's kind of hard to put that on the radar when we don't know. I did some work for a judge that works out of Rice County since our last meeting, and she said they're pushing more towards smaller courtrooms. So is there possibilities of dividing like one of our courtrooms, or?
You've got two fairly small courtrooms right now in there. I think, the one larger courtroom upstairs, the big ceremonial one, it's borderline probably as far as it becoming two hearing rooms, but certainly would be something that you could.
This is a district court that you're talking about, so that fourth courtroom wouldn't have to be here. Could be someplace else.
There's, as I kind of alluded to last time, I think this needs a lot more conversation with the state court system as to what are they really seeing, in this district and where that distribution of judges needs to be.
It's hard to prioritize till we know.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. I think one of the main things there is just to acknowledge that there are some deficiencies in that building from the safety and security side of things, and also for private, attorney meeting spaces and stuff like that. But that's what's been a challenge for that building for, over a decade already. So
Well,
that issue existed.
There is some space in that building that could be reconfigured for some of that stuff already.
There's a whole attic.
Well, the mats are gone, so, but on the second floor, there is some space there that could be reconfigured.
Yeah, so some additional dialogue with the state court system would probably be before you land upon total square footage. This is me taking a shot in the dark just based on what I know about courts and the kind of conversation that we had during the study as to what some of the deficiencies are. So it would take a little bit more in-depth conversation with them to come up with what we actually would want to do.
So again, for board discussion, option is a smaller addition at some point, it's a replacement county attorney building. Again, that they don't have to go at the same time, they can be on different timetables, but we just wanted to present to the board, there could be a larger addition that incorporates a lot of things, or a smaller addition, or no addition at all.
I have a question. Is there a possibility of turning the county attorney's building, if we were to build it the other way, so they could stay in their existing building until the new one was done?
Not likely, just the way that.
On the south side of the alley, is there enough room?
Oh, I see what you're saying, put it more down in this area here? Potentially, yeah, we'd have to look at the geometry and see how close to the existing
No,
building.
we don't have to worry about space, we don't have to worry about parking during construction, but we have that whole new parking lot, so.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing to look at.
The other question I've got for you, John, is in the first schematic, you have the 20-year space needs of 7,030 square feet. And in the building, I think you have 11,500 square feet. And you were gonna check to see if there was something there that. New county attorney office, you have 11,500 square feet.
Yeah.
The difference between 7,000 and 11,000 at $450 a square foot is a lot of money.
Yeah,
That's for, childcare,
a little bit of it. Yeah. A little bit of it is, that particular component of it. Another is there are some other space deficiencies in there. We had identified a couple conference rooms and interview spaces and that type of stuff, which would, in their long-term, plan.
So basically, the first page is wrong.
So it probably doesn't have yes, you're probably correct in assuming that we probably need to add the grossing numbers in here if we're gonna continue to use that slide.
The first number indicates that it includes child support staff.
So these are net square footages versus gross square footages, but.
Yeah.
So again, the huge caveat for all of this is any new construction, any addition is gonna be designed for the space needs that we know at the time of design, which most of this, again, is based on our best estimate.
My comment was there was such a
There is
between those two that.
And there is a discrepancy there that
I mean, that's 50% difference.
Well, this is the actual program, which suggests that we need roughly about 6,500 square feet is what they're using today. In the future would be, 11,800 square feet. If we include the child support component.
I think I asked this last time, I don't remember, but this building have to be bigger than the community corrections building, or?
Yeah.
By how many square feet?
That one's 7,000.
Oh, it's 4,000.
And how much is for the child support?
Take 6 positions.
7,
How many square feet?
840 square feet. Those are offices.
All right, John, so you're gonna have to explain to me the net and gross and what you mean by that, because again, Commissioner Krieger's point, the spreadsheet says 7,030 square feet. And then when you look at the,
You have identified an error in my
okay,
presentation.
okay, I'm not trying to identify error, I'm just trying to figure out.
It's a good catch, and I do recall you mentioning it the last time, and I.
Like I said,
did not get
that's a
that.
big difference.
All right, thank you.
All I'm trying to share is that if we wanna look at the actual numbers that developed, that these are based on conversations that we've with the county attorney's office, which is that if we are going to include child support, we would need roughly about 11,800 square feet. And I'll fix that and reset it up.
And I think, John, maybe we're gonna talk about the nets versus the gross, what the nets.
So net square feet is inside of buildings, so that's the inside of offices, workstations, and so then you need the circulation space around all of that stuff, the hallways, the walking paths, all that kind of stuff. That gets us from the actual square footage of, where it says subtotal county attorney, 7,030 square feet. The 1.4 factor gets us all the internal circulation, thickness of internal walls, that type of stuff. Building gross number gets you external walls, mechanical spaces, all of that type of stuff. And they're just typical grossing factors that we use for planning and programming purposes that are based on kind of historical numbers.
14 years ago, we bought the 2 houses, is there any more room available there, or not?
Which,
We bought, like, the house where the community corrections is at, we bought the house to the south of the alley, and
So currently they're parking,
right?
I don't know that they would be big enough
And with the alley.
with the, yeah.
yeah, so you're talking these properties down here.
Didn't we kinda looked at that at one point, and
Yeah,
the city would not.
Right,
be out
setbacks
alley.
and, yep. So that would just be additional parking, which it is today.
Right.
But is it the board's preference to acquire additional land or utilize the land you already own?
Well, it
And I
depends
mean,
on the
that's-
work, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of your long-range
If we
vision.
put the 11,000 square foot, would that fit on the south side of the alley?
I would imagine it would, if the block is similar to this block here. Usually they split that across the alley, so I'd have to expand my image here and confirm that, but yeah, for these 3 properties down here, I imagine it follows the same typical block.
It shows the alley there, doesn't it?
Yeah, right here.
And that lot to the south of the alley doesn't go all the way to the corner of corrections, there's a house guard there. Yeah. So it looks smaller.
Yeah, it's a smaller lot. And I don't know the map, yes, that, where that lot is, that's by the property lines right there. It's actually, over the other way to the other line.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure what you're asking, what are you trying to figure out?
Well, there we have, that gravel lot of the south side of the alley.
Yeah.
That would be big enough for 11,000 square feet.
This lot right here.
Yeah. And the alley would be an in and out, you know what I mean? And that'd be a big parking lot. Not that we need more parking lot, but that way I'm just thinking of a way that if the house, the county attorney's office, all the buildings be down.
I think we're making some assumptions that we're building a new building,
Well,
that's
I'm-
not the case.
Well, if we do build a new building, I'd like to know if we could do that, is my question.
You wanna know your options?
Yeah.
come from this meeting that any new buildings are gonna be built without more study.
I agree.
You know, that's, we're not gonna spring this on the public, that's not gonna happen. So that's why we're doing a 20-year study here. We're gonna be methodical about how we do this.
So we left off with kind of the two different courthouse options, the county attorney option, and then the secure public entrance is kind of incorporated in some pieces to the addition, but again, just to reemphasize that as part of the board's immediate plan, we could certainly address safety and security issues separate and apart from having to do an addition.
Yep.
Yeah, if security was simply the number one priority, there is some space underneath that canopy coming in that easily be expanded without expanding the footprint of the building.
Does that canopy have cross footings all the way around the outside?
There might be where
The pillar.
the pillars would, yeah.
I looked at that already, but that's not, I mean, it can
We
be,
can overcome that.
yeah.
It's not addition ready.
Well, that's where my mind is going, it could be really just.
We
block
have-
out
Slap
the
up some
entrances
plywood
and
and call it good.
It would be pretty easy to finish that up.
And I think the sheriff said that he could get the security he needed in there, in that space, so.
It's early conversation related to adding on to the courthouse. And I think last time we did explore the idea if we wanted to divest from the courthouse and build a new building someplace else. There is sort of at the detention center site that would work for that.
Is that still on the table as far
Too
as the
far
board
away,
is concerned?
Building.
I'm not the known buildings per se for me.
I think if you're asking for my vote on that.
Well,
you put a big-
consensus,
you
yes.
put a big
I can put a big
red
red X through this one too.
Is the consensus of the board?
Two X's.
All right. We will do that. And then the last building we looked at was the highway shop, and Renee had mentioned it's in good shape. We didn't really see any reason to do any major changes to it. I think the big thing is you do have that expansion space up there, and talked about whether you put extension out at that building or whether you can work this into some flexible meeting space. It certainly is on the table as something to make sure we're budgeting for if that's a desire.
That's kind of what it's used for now,
Yeah.
the community corrections use it. Do you use that space on the lawn anymore?
No.
No?
The one thing to note is there are no bathrooms up here, so if you're gonna do any sort of long-term thinking in this area, you might wanna consider adding some rest of the.
The other thing for the board to consider is obviously if and when the city moves forward with this new fire hall, our Skyborn team is currently housed in the old fire hall. So we have been looking at other ways that we can accommodate the needs of Skyborn without having to factor that into any kind of plans for a new fire hall. The second floor of the highway building does have the potential of carving out some space for Skyborn, plus the meeting facilities. We've talked about the fact that room 40 is the biggest meeting space we have outside of the community center, so it is possible that we could add some technology to that second floor and be able to accommodate up to 100 people on that second floor as a meeting space. So there's a couple of different scenarios, even from our own emergency management perspective, we might wanna bring in some additional connection points and that sort of thing. There's technology in the building, running it up to the second floor. So as a staff, we're looking at some of our other capital improvement needs that are not building specific, but just about adapting and flexing the spaces we do have.
I have a question on that space. Is there just one entrance on the north end?
There's the stairs coming out of the side shop as well.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
yeah, so the elevator is on the north side, the main entrance is over on the east side. I think here's the main entrance right
No,
here.
that's the side entrance to the building.
Oh, there it is, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, on the south side.
If that, you were asking for entrances,
Oh, I was saying if there's only one entrance and it hangs with that. Okay.
Yeah, something would have to be done there so we could keep a security entrance for highway.
Ron's got a question.
Well,
Just a thought here, if you think of anything for emergency management or even Skyborn, we should have a stronger building for them. I mean, the basement of the fire hall is obviously a concrete and bricked up.
Oh,
You don't wanna lose the equipment, you don't wanna lose the personnel that are trying to keep us safe. So, something to keep in mind if they're thinking about the second floor, which is just the tin roof.
Yeah, we have talked about what we could do, short-term, long-term, so, yeah, absolutely.
But thank you for thinking of me.
We could leave them in the basement somewhere too, always looking for options.
So I think we started the conversation as this may be an option for extension, right? What's another option for extension? And that's only assuming that we're vacating the annex, correct?
So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is we haven't looked at any other locations. We were trying to figure out what we had for existing space, and the idea was, well, we've got some space on the second floor. I think as staff, because of the public accessibility factor, we're not gonna move engineering up to the second floor.
No.
That's ridiculous.
I
So the second floor would be a meeting space or whatever, but trying to get the public in and out and that sort of thing. I think we as staff have probably determined, subject to additional conversation with the board, that the second floor of the highway building is probably not the right place for extension. Where else we would put them is yet to be determined, because, you know, is there a better spot on the fairgrounds? Is there another addition we could put onto the community center, because that was the original plan of the community center. So I think there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle that aren't incorporated into the analysis that we asked Wool to do.
What is a real public accessibility needed for the extension? I don't think it's that, is there that much public coming and going there? I think it's pretty minuscule myself.
Well, it's the 4-H students, it's really your master gardeners, all of the meetings that they have, the educational pieces and that sort of thing. We would have to have some flexibility for them to bring in presenters, or to bring in tables, or to bring in materials, whatever that might be. They do have some extensive storage needs. We haven't really broached the subject of could some of that be purged, because I think they're really good at collecting. I'm not too sure that they're really good at taking old stuff and moving it on. But we did not ask Wold to do any kind of an analysis in terms of what extension would need for the next 20 years. And so that's really outside the scope of our conversation. So for the board's benefit, absolutely. If we go forward with demolishing the annex, we'll absolutely have to develop a plan for where extension would land.
So, but we're not there yet.
We are not there yet.
Okay, because my mind hasn't vacated that building yet. You're gonna have to make a pretty compelling case. I know it needs a roof and it needs some stuff. But I'd like to walk through that discussion. So I don't know when or where we have that, but, I'm not sold that we need to vacate that building and tear it down. If you're gonna go to Rome, you said the building is thousands of years old, so,
I doubt that the building was built to Roman standards.
I don't know.
I would hope that the viaduct system or the bathroom system will be a little bit better than it is.
They use different kind of.
Is that what it is?
They did.
Okay. So I think ultimately, as we sort of started the conversation, if developing a long-term solution for the annex is your number one solution, then we're gonna figure out what your options are. We'll figure out what funding mechanisms there are, so that, in other words, we need to know what the board's priorities are in terms of facilities, and then we can begin putting together a little bit deeper dive into the things you're addressing, which is, you know, do we put a roof on the building, and what does that buy us in terms of longevity, suitable life, and that sort of
I
thing.
think what you need is you need to have some sort of an idea of bringing that building up to standards, what that's gonna cost. I think that's, to me, that's the big issue.
But again, once the board determines their priorities, then we can then go back and begin creating those different options for the board consideration. But we definitely wanna know, if the board is like, we're gonna keep that building for the next 20 years, then we're gonna be bringing different things to the board, which is, what are the things that we need to address the immediate maintenance needs?
That's why I think this meeting is backwards. I think we need to know some dollars and cents on some of these different options before we make some final decisions.
You can't make a decision based on money, you really need to make a decision long-term.
I can.
I get that, but ultimately, I don't wanna be sitting with the next board that says, why did we spend all that money on that building if we were gonna just tear it down anyways? So I wanna know what this board, because this is the only body I have to work with, what is your 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan? And then we will make investments based on that, so that the next board that comes along isn't saying, well, why did we put X dollars into that?
Yeah,
Because
I
we
don't
had-
think it's an either or, I think you're both right, you can both be right. You need to have a plan for the next 20 years, but money does play a factor.
Yes, it does, and I'm not
It's
about
not
to go to
even
the
like-
taxpayer and say, we're gonna stick $4 or $5 million into that building instead of maybe looking at the option of demolishing that building, doing something different.
But without this conversation, we wouldn't even be talking about it. That's why I think you have to have this conversation. But
But I think money has to be included.
Oh, for sure. But if we're gonna not build a building and we wanna use that building, we need to find out what that costs. And is it gonna last 20 years?
Right, and
It's all it comes.
I think what Renee, we kinda, staff wants out of this is the annex our number one priority? If so, I think we can come back with those answers, right? You know, or do we wanna focus on courthouse security to,
So if you're asking me what the priority is in my mind, I think it's 1 and 1A. I think they're both important. Security obviously is important, and that annex is leaking, so we need to do something with it. But do we Band-Aid it, because we're gonna build a building in a year or two, or do we put it on a new roof on the right way, instead of Band-Aiding the roof? I think that's the discussion.
Well, I
And
think
then-
we still should get, the standards. I'd like to see what that price is,
Yeah, for sure.
just to see what it is.
So if we want, so this matrix is not by any means scientific, but what I tried to do is to come up with factors that could help us to make some kind of a decision, and by us, I'm meaning the board, in terms of where do we wanna put our investment? So, for example, corrections, we know that it's in good shape. There's probably gonna be some maintenance down the road. We don't need to worry about preserving or deferred maintenance at this point. So ranking probably in terms of the 8 buildings that are there, or 7, that's probably number 7 on your list, because that's the one we don't really need a whole lot of investment in. The highway shop, maybe that's 6, because again, it's fairly new. We'll have to do some periodic maintenance just because of normal wear and tear. We're not looking at an expansion to the highway shop or anything like that. It is adequate for the amount of equipment we have. It's in good shape health-wise. Landfill office and shop, again, maybe that's number 5 on your list. And again, I'm just throwing this out but if we look at it, health and safety, it's probably okay, but is it functionally the right size? Is that shop out there, that whole building that we use, functional size? That might bump it up a little higher on your priority list. The office itself is probably in pretty good shape. The front area where the staff sit is the gatehouse. The back room is the kitchen. It's probably a little small. There's no meeting space out there, but it's probably in pretty good shape. The admin building, we know as a building, is in great shape. I mean, there's periodic maintenance. We might have to replace a part here, fix a leak there.
But someday it's gonna need a roof.
Right, so,
And that's not gonna be cheap.
but is that on your 20-year horizon? Is that on your
well,
30-year horizon?
Well, it's within the 20 years.
It's
It's
within-
within 20 years, because it's already 20 years old.
So I think we already have that on the CIP.
So I think as we're plotting this out, let's make sure we build that back in. So it really kind of boils down to the annex, the county attorney building, and the courthouse. The county attorney building, it was a funeral home with a house stuck to it. It is not sized properly for current functions. So I think in terms of functional size, we can say, yeah, that's a problem. In terms of existing conditions, it probably needs a lot more repairs than not. Is it as bad off as the annex? I don't know, but those are the kinds of things I wanted the board to be talking about, so that ultimately we can get to a short list that Jake and John and everybody can start putting numbers for different scenarios, like the board has asked for. If we need to put a whole new roof on the annex, what does that look like? What are some of the other things? The good news is we actually just had a functional analysis done. We kind of have a pretty good start on the long list of things that needs to be upgraded over there. So at least we've got a place to start that we can get that information to the board. The county attorney building, is that a 5-year thing, is that a 10-year thing? I don't know, I just know that currently, right now, we're gonna have to put some money to make that space usable, and we're gonna be putting money in the old house park, because we've already basically maxed out the funeral home side of it. The courthouse, I think we've divided that into 2 categories, which is the courthouse function itself. We probably need more information from the state. We need to take a look at some of those office spaces, because the ceiling heights are wonky. Could we expand and create some meeting spaces from a courthouse perspective?
Can the state mandate number of courtrooms, or is it a request?
County has, under the 484 statute, the county has the responsibility of giving a building. What it says in regards to a courtroom, it's just a matter of giving a courtroom. So that would be something Campbell could look under, the 44.77.
They do, we could certainly ask the court administrator for the board and get that kind of information. I think there's a lot of conversation around that. I believe they do calculations. I know for sure, based on the number of case filings we have as a county, they change our judges, how many judges we have. I think that plays into the courtroom analysis as well.
My guess is if you ask them what they would like, they're probably gonna tell you want another
It's the
courtroom.
state.
If you ask them what's required, it might be different. I think that at least where my mind goes, I've had enough experience dealing with some of that. Depending on what you ask for.
So I think the courthouse probably has a split score. The building itself is probably fine for the next 10 years, absent some mandate. Security is probably one of your top priorities. You know, so that, and so we could develop a plan and a strategy for the board to upgrade that entrance. We would have, you know, an estimate for that, and then we would bring that to the board as part of your overall investment. So I think ultimately, is there consensus from the board that you would like additional research on options for the annex, options for the county attorney building, and an option for security for the courthouse?
I think that works well.
So what I would propose for the board, I think everybody nodded, Commissioner Brady,
Yeah,
was that
well,
kind
it's
of?
fine.
So we, as staff, can work with Wold and begin articulating options if possible. I think the courthouse entrance, it's gonna be one plan. You know, it's gonna be based on the sheriff's input in terms of what that workflow needs to look like, the metal detectors and all the rest of that, and then we'll put together some numbers and a cost for that. For the county attorney building, we'll have to figure out what we can capture in terms of space from the old house versus new construction. I think we've got some numbers on that if we were to mirror what we did for the CCA building. And then for the annex, what can we do to rehab it and buy us 20 more years of life?
I was just gonna say,
Or
I
something
think
else.
we need to know, not just roof, but whatever else it needs. Because I know there's some foundation issues, if I remember right.
The old part, the old basement gets moisture. So when we're looking at this, I guess one of the questions is what like workflow efficiency, because obviously that building, you know, has small lobby, you know, clients are coming back into.
Well, that's all of it, that's part of the
Okay.
analysis,
Just
so
wanna-
is that
I
party
think
walls,
that's-
is
yeah,
it easy
that's-
to reconfigure?
That's where you have to get Amber involved.
I think there's the do nothing and keep it operating, then there's let's make it more efficient and work better, and then there's the what does it take to replace it?
So we'll run those scenarios, and then once we have, I mean, parallel to that, Ashley can begin taking a look at, because again, we're operating from the standpoint that the board wants to be as levy neutral as possible. And so what can we do to tie some of this around our existing bonds, one going off the books this year, one going off the books, our only other debt. So Steele County has no debt but those 2 bonds, one going off this year, one going off in 2030. What would it look like to keep our debt payments flat from a levy perspective? Because that will also affect our timing, because it may mean that we can't get to a particular project because of what it looks like to maintain that level financing plan. Then there might be some interim funding. So the only thing that I know we just don't have time to talk about today is the board will have to consider from time to time, in fact, you've got a request on your agenda for tonight, that we will probably still need to be making some investments in our existing spaces to maintain functionality, to maintain safety, to buy the extra space that we might need. So maybe as part of your next work session, I would recommend that we talk about how do we want to consider these interim expenses until we have that larger facilities plan worked out. Because I don't think we're gonna have numbers or a financing plan for you by your next work session. It might be a little while, maybe a special meeting might be in order for that, but I think ultimately, I wanna make sure that staff has a better understanding of the board's priorities and preferences as we look at some of the intermediate things that we're doing. So for example, when Dave talks about technology replacements or upgrades, we're always thinking about, could we remove it? But if we're talking about adding carpet to a space or adding a wall to a space, there's not a whole lot of portability in that kind of investment. But we might still need it because we need it for that functioning space. And we talked a fair amount about us standing up human services as of 1/1/27. For the full board, we did have our first subcommittee meeting with HMA, and there are some service delivery decisions the board will need to make, but we won't be making those decisions until probably June. But however, those decisions, if we're going to embed staff, human services staff in various departments, they talked about putting the child support team in the county attorney's office, that could affect the numbers that we'll create. So if we're gonna embed human services staff in public health, for example, that's gonna change their space analysis. If we're embedding some of those workers in the county attorney's office, we did incorporate some of those positions, we're hoping we got the right number. So just know that some of this for the full board has yet to be determined, but will be coming to the full board probably at one of your meetings in June, where there would be a presentation from HMA that walks through not only what are the mandated services, but how are we going to deliver them to provide for that maximum collaboration, cooperation, and efficiency for all practical purposes. So there's still a few moving parts to this conversation, so that interim window is kind of important for staff. Questions at this point from a facilities planning perspective?
Can we take these with us and turn them on to you?
Yeah, if you want to add your comments, absolutely. I will compile them. I think we have a general sense. Now we just need to take that one more step
Yeah, I
and
think
start
we know
offering specific
which ones
options.
to start with,
Yep.
it's just a matter of what we're gonna do.
Yep. Other questions from the board before we adjourn? Mr. Cherry, turn it back to you.
Mr. Boogie, have a good trip?
Thank you.
Yeah, have fun.
We'll come back, rest of
Make sure you come back, I don't know if you can test it.